Hi, this is Vaughan at WestOakvillePottery.ca in Nova Scotia, Canada. I am going to do this video while I'm throwing on the wheel, which is about how to sell your pottery. This is the Lunenburg Farmers Market in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, where a whole bunch of vendors set up crafts and also food specialty items. So this would be the kind of thing I would suggest trying at first. Hi, Melissa. This is my old assistant, Melissa. She's a young assistant, sorry. So Melissa, how long have you been doing pottery?
Actually, I think eight or so years.
Yeah, time flies.
You're
Yeah.
playing in the mud.
Yeah. And Melissa's got a couple of nice young little kids who hopefully will be helping her out pretty soon in doing this. But as you can see, she's really into some intensely decorated pieces. And this piece, 15 hours. Yeah. But Melissa's got a good business sense, and she's actually got a whole line of small pieces that are what I call the spontaneous purchases when people walk by. And so that's a good thing to have, but she's also got the spectacular pieces so that people get drawn in by looking at a large piece. You got anything else you want to say, Melissa?
Here's the Instagram. Melissa.pottery on Instagram.
On Instagram. There you go. Okay, this is a friend of mine called Jason, and he's been doing pottery for a while now, doing the farmers market in Lunenburg. And I sold him one of my older kilns. Hey Jason,
Hello,
want to introduce yourself?
I'm Jason from Lunenburg Pottery. We have an Instagram account. It's Lunenburg_pottery at Instagram. Also, LunenburgNSBeekeepers.com is our website for the beekeeping end of things. But yeah, we're getting into pottery. It's all cone 6 stoneware. I've got like a North Atlantic theme and a few other kind of raku-esque type glazes that seem to be going well. Been potting seriously since sort of a little bit pre-pandemic, I guess. Before that, it kind of stretched on, but it was sort of a little bit more sparse. So.
All right. Well, thanks for introducing yourself, and I'll film a bit more of your pottery.
Great, thank you.
All right. Jason also does a whole line of honey, and so he's got two different things that he's selling at the farmers market here. He had beehives right where we live, and I had so many bees in the yard. But this is a good combination. If you're going to do markets, to find a couple of different product lines that you can actually show. So if people are in the mood for honey, they get honey. If they're in the mood for pottery, they get pottery. And he's doing a really nice display here in this farmer's market. When you have a display of pottery at a craft fair, I think you should concentrate on maybe 2 or 3 color variations. And I love this one. And customers just cannot resist a whole shelf full of coffee mugs. So if you have mugs, then put a lot of them out, and people just spend a long time sorting through them. Small, inexpensive little trays that you can make in just a couple of minutes gives you those spontaneous purchases. And green is a sort of a happy, it's green. It's a nice color. And so I have a variety of greens, and these seem to be selling, consistently, but not overpoweringly. The most common pieces that I sell are blue. And I'm on the ocean. If you're in the desert southwest in New Mexico, this may not be the color for you. Potters seem to love brown, I always have, but it doesn't sell very well. But it's classic, and so I do sell browns fairly often, but it's not the most popular combination. Blue, green, copper, red, turquoise is really not selling at all at the moment. So this was one that was so popular, it was in fashion, and guess what? Fashions go out of fashion. This grouping has been doing well for a while, but it has slowed down this year. I'm not seeing as many pieces of this selling. I thought this would do really well for me, but it hasn't, so we can all make mistakes. This one is doing really well for me at the moment. Okay, I guess I should give you a little background information, because my first attempt at doing pottery was at high school, and I was about 17, I guess, when I first touched a piece of clay. So I actually had a couple of years of just doing pottery classes, and it basically motivated me through selling some pieces and having fun. Without any stress or of having to make money at it, kind of thing. So it kind of got me into it. I remember that it was actually so motivating that I actually skipped classes, although I probably shouldn't be saying that. But I actually, loved it so much, and it just kind of there were other subjects I was doing in high school, and I skipped them and just hid in the pottery room. But my pottery teacher gave me a deal, because I obviously showed some energy and in that direction. He said, if you clean my classroom every night, you can stay for a couple of hours and work in the studio until they started evening classes about 7 o'clock. So I had about 2.5 hours where I could just do it every night if I wanted to, and that really started my career, I guess, because I took work to a gallery in Holmfirth in Yorkshire, and I remember the lady's name, I think, was Mrs. Wilkinson, who owned the gallery, and I took a box of pots to her on a bus, carrying them, got up at the bus stop, got off, walked across the road, there's the gallery, walked in, and very humbly sort of said, I would like to show you some pottery, and she actually went through the whole box, and I said, are there any that you like? And she said, I'll take the lot. So I sold an entire box of pottery, and I remember I got £22 back in 1973 or 74. It'd be around that time, I think. Probably late 74 is my guess, and it was a lot of money back then, about $40, I guess. Okay, I'm going to show you, before I get deeply into this video, a whole bunch of display facility type things that you can build yourself, just to get you in the kind of craft fair mood that if you want to start doing shows, markets, farmers markets, craft fairs, even studio sales, home sales, where you have a little home party, you can actually build any of this stuff, and it's not that hard to build. You just need some basic carpenter skills. So here is the pedestal idea, where you can display one large piece or a grouping of small pieces, and they nest inside each other. And I make my own pedestals. Initially I bought some. They were very expensive, and I figured out how to make corners that you can slot plywood into, 1/4 inch Luan, which is also called plywood, and I can show you a profile of that, which I'll do right now. Okay, this is the little profile that I use. It's 1-inch square wood that I simply run through a table saw, and making a 1/4 inch channel all the way down. You can see how it's done there, and then this is an old piece, but basically 1-inch piece of wood, and then you run it through the table saw, leaving yourself a 1/8 of an inch edge versus a 1/2 inch, 5/8 of an inch other area with a 1/4 inch gouge all the way down. There you go. So this is how to make pedestals really simply, because the plywood then 1/4 inch Luan just simply slots in on the two ends, and you put them all together, you glue it all in, and it's stable. I've had those pedestals I just showed you for decades, and they're still holding good. And so this is basically how it's done. Slot 4 panels and then make yourself a top, into those four corners that I just use a table saw to make. Really worked for me for decades, and it's very sturdy. I wouldn't use the 1/4 inch Luan, I would use the 1/2 inch Luan for the bottom pieces, and then after that the 1/4 inch Luan. This is sat like this for 5 years and it hasn't actually collapsed. It would make a very big bang, so that's been very good. Rather than spend a lot of money on risers, that cylinder in white there holding the mug up is just plumber's pipe, and I threw a simple little dish turned upside down to put on top of the plumber's pipe, and that acts as a riser, which is really cheap. One long piece, 8 feet of plumber's pipe can give you, 20 little risers of different heights. There's another one. There's another one right there. So it's plumber's pipe with a little dish turned upside down on top of it for a riser. This is a nice way of showing a statement again when you do your nice color combination you feel strongly about, and you make a lot of pieces and you make a whole display of it. So this is when you really kind of have something that sells well. You just make a whole display of it. So here is another way you can just creatively make gaps in. This is 6-inch boards. No, actually I think these are 8-inch boards. They could be used, you could use both. I think my guess is it's either 6 or 8, I can't even remember. But these have lasted me decades as well. So I make a variety of this style of shelf, and you can just make them up as you go along. It's literally just cut and screwed together, and then you can actually make 12-inch deep ones here, going up the wall there as well. So that's another way of doing a creative display, just making it yourself. This is a lot of work. It's basically horizontal shelving, and then you make yourself a lot of little tiny verticals that you simply glue into place, but it makes a really good way of displaying a lot of pieces. And so I just made one of these so far, but I keep meaning to make another one for mugs as well, but still just with the tea bowl. Making groupings of colors is really important to actually show, like a really courageous statement. You're not just making one of something, you make a whole group. So living in Mansfield, Ohio was not a bad thing, because there were a lot of potters in Ohio. And up to that point, all I had was a table that I would take to craft fairs. Just like most people who are starting today, you simply get a table and you actually put a cloth across it and you put your pots on top and you see whether you can sell them. From a table to a set of 12 pedestals really made my work look a lot better. So when I'm talking about this kind of stuff, I'm thinking the first thing you've got to do if you're going to be moving into the realm of selling work is you've got to figure out a display and some way that you can actually show your work off to the best. And I thought at that time that pedestals were going to do it. 3 different sizes that would nest inside each other. And one was the biggest was 3 feet high with a 16-inch square on top, and then I went down to a 14 and then to a 12, so they would nest inside each other, and they were different heights, 3 feet, 2 feet, maybe. I didn't go to 1 foot, it was probably about 16 inches for the smaller one, but it was enough so that you could give variety in your booth, but it could not show that many pieces. So after maybe less than a year doing that, or even 6 months, I actually decided to put shelves across those pedestals so I could have different heights of shelves, and actually have a few pedestals with no shelves on it, kind of thing. But I could make my booth a little bit more interesting. So that's a good point, is you need things at different heights, and you actually want to get as many pieces as you can in your display. If you're selling inexpensive functional work, people like to see variety and a selection. So you got to think about that. So the pedestal thing wasn't good. Shelving made it better. But getting it in a van, as soon as you move into shelving, you got to have a bigger van, a bigger car, minivan, whatever, from moving from a small hatchback to a minivan, and then a minivan to a larger van. You've got to think about pickup trucks potentially, or towing a trailer. So whatever you do, you're going to have to figure out how to be mobile and get your stuff around the country. Also, the length of time it takes to set up a booth is important, because you get 3 hours maybe at some shows to set up, and other shows you may have the whole day to do it. So think about the vehicle and time it takes to actually pack that vehicle, unpack that vehicle, and set up a whole display. Also, you've got to think about the inventory that you're carrying has to fit in that van too, and having it organized so it's labeled is very important. You really have to kind of try and get as many pieces with you. I would say at least you should carry about twice the inventory that you think you can sell at a show, because you don't want to let your booth look picked over, because people just won't bother walking in. They like to see choice. So labeling and making it easy to retrieve in the middle of a show, hiding it so it's neat in your booth. So maybe having curtains across the shelving, so the boxes are underneath the shelving with curtains across, so you can actually hide it. And when you're actually doing craft fairs, you need to keep good records, so receipts and good bookkeeping techniques. I know that being today everything's on a computer, but we were doing it just by hand writing everything. And you've got to consider when you're pricing things, are you doing it for retail only, or are you going to start including wholesale, so that you can take on some galleries, which gives you credibility. So if people see your work in a gallery and then see you at a show, they don't have to, they've got the proof already that you're a decent potter. And so you have to consider that. But because pricing for retail and wholesale means the gallery is not going to like it if you undercut them. So you've got to be aware of that if you're selling in an area where you have a gallery. So as far as wholesale, the pros and cons of it, wholesale is good because you've got no traveling. You don't have any hotel expenses for doing craft fairs. You also don't get any feedback from your customers if you're doing wholesale, except for the gallery owners. But you don't have to have a van, so basically that's a big, huge saving if you're not going to travel in a big van to do shows. You have to be pretty organized doing wholesale, because the gallery owner wants his work when it's needed. So you also have to go to, potentially you need to do one show a year, or maybe you're not. You can do a few retail craft fairs and pick some galleries up along the way, which is what we did for several years. Although eventually I started going to the Baltimore ACC show, and that was a big difference. But anyway, you need to have, doing wholesale, a good packing area so that you can use bubble wrap peanuts and boxes to get your work to the gallery in one piece. And pricing, accuracy, and policies regarding returns are important too, because if you do send work to a gallery and it gets broken in transit, they're not going to be paying you money for it. But at the same time, I think from my experience, when a gallery called me and said that this piece or so many pieces were broken in the shipment, was I going to take that on trust? Because I want to see whether those pieces were broken. It's a tough world sometimes, and if somebody just tells you that you have to reduce your price because this and this was broken in transit, you want to make sure that it really was broken, and it's not just a strategy for getting you to take less money. And also another thing is I still date things all the time, and I had one gallery who didn't like me dating things because they wanted everything to look brand new, and they didn't like something to be on the shelf in their gallery that was a year or two old. If it hadn't sold straight away, they wanted to make sure it still could look fresh and not have a date on it. So that was interesting. I think it's also nice doing wholesale because you stay home. And doing craft fairs, you're on the road all the time. Wholesale means you have a family life. It's a real, it's like a job, I suppose, in a way. It becomes a bit more business-like if you're doing wholesale and you're staying at home, going to work at a certain time in the morning, leaving in the evening, whatever. Craft fairs were sort of fun, but really hard work. So talking about craft fairs, the advantage, of course, is you get 100% of the money. So if you want to actually put in all that effort and work going to craft fairs, you get to keep all the money, minus a booth fee and travel expenses, which in the good old days, I used to think that anything above 20% meant the craft fair for the booth fee, the travel and the hotel and food at the hotel. If it came to more than 20% of what I made at the craft fair, we were really talking about, was it really worth doing the craft fair? And a lot of the times the craft fair wasn't so great, and your expenses came out over 50%, which means you should have just stayed home and done wholesale. So you got to be a little careful about that, and you only will find that out by doing it. Another thing that I think you have to consider is you've got to have some promotional materials, because you want to stay in touch with your customers, whether that's just a little business card with a website address on it, or whether you want to go the route of having like catalog sheets, which are a little out of date now with the web. Just about everything now is digital. I don't have any catalog sheets. I use a postcard, a business card, and I have a rack card that can put in tourist places. And that's what I use for my promotional materials. I remember the days when we used to mail out flyers and catalog sheets. Those days are long gone. You can do a little bit of both as well, wholesale and retail. The one thing you've got to be careful if you do that, though, is you don't want to step on the toes of a gallery. If you go to a craft fair in a town where you have a gallery, your pricing has to be absolutely correct. You're not undercutting the gallery. And you might want to tell the gallery that you're doing this, because they may not like it. They may want an exclusive in their city and not want you coming in and undercutting them, or even just taking sales away from them. On the other hand, the gallery might think it's a bonus, where their customers from the gallery will get to meet the artist at the craft fair. So you just have to be fair and just kind of let the gallery know, I think, if you're going to be in the area where it is. And I think now we move on to location. And what is it going to be like if you actually decide to do a little retail shop yourself? Because doing craft fairs is really hard work. You're on the road 3-4 days a weekend, and then you come home, make lots of work as fast as you can, then maybe you go a week without doing a craft fair. And maybe you don't. Maybe you do one back-to-back, or for 10-12 weeks in the summer. So you're on the road every weekend. That's hard work. So you may decide to go the route where you want to keep all the money yourself, but you want to actually have your own retail location. And that's, you've got to choose your place. You can actually choose a city, an urban location. You can choose a rural location. If you're going to be choosing that destination, maybe you need to choose a destination place that is actually already known for something, whether it might be a really pretty geographical kind of location like a big waterfall, Niagara Falls, or whether it's you've got a big state park right there and it's a nice little village, the entrance to a state park, or it's on the ocean, which is where we are. You've got to just pick a destination that's already attracting a lot of people to it, and that way you can actually save on advertising, because you don't need to tell people you're there. They already are coming anyway. So let's say you've made a decision and you're going to be retail in your own studio. You might decide to have a little shop, or you could have a little gallery space, living room on your own house. You're going to have to make sure that's legal. What are the bylaws in your town? is that space going to be a small space? In our little town here, Lunenburg municipality here, Lunenburg Township, they will allow you to have a business in your own home as long as you don't use more than 25% of the space of your own home for that retail operation. And if you do that, you don't have to comply with certain regulations regarding disability, accessibility, and stuff, because it's your own home. So I think that different towns will have different rules about that. But if you're going to set up in your own home, you better make sure that's legal, and you better make sure your neighbors know that you're doing it so that they don't object. If you go to a rural location, chances are it will cost you less money to do this. An urban location, things may be a lot more expensive in the town. If you're going to be setting up in an area of the town that's got the customer base that you need, chances are the property values are very high in that area, because they're buying artwork. They obviously have disposable income. There probably is an expensive area. It's also a place where, if you're doing craft fairs, you might want to look at the area where the craft fair is to make sure that there is an affluent clientele around that craft fair. Anyway, if you are in a rural space, you're going to get more land around you. You've got some, ability to try things, garden sculptures, outdoor displays, and stuff like that. And the bylaws are probably way less restrictive if you're in a rural area. But you also have less population, and so there's no chance that people will be walking by your driveway in the middle of rural Ohio. They might be driving by, but then you've got to figure out how to make them stop. So that means signage. Maybe check on the rules about that too. So they're driving by. You need to have an attractive sign or something that will make them slow down and look at it. Curbside appeal in real estate, I guess they would call that. In the urban space, you don't have as much, building size maybe for the money that you can afford. Maybe you're in an industrial little place where, there's plenty of warehousing kind of places you can set a studio up, but there literally are no pedestrians walking around outside your building. So how do you get people there as well? But I think you have to kind of think about all these things, really. It's really one of the things that I made 2 mistakes before I found this successful place here. So I had to try somewhere in Ohio where it never worked, and then I moved to upstate New York where it worked to a certain degree, but it never got above the level where it was worth me, sort of concentrating on my own retail gallery. Anyway, the thing that, in these urban places, which is where I've mostly sort of decided I'm going to set up my retail locations, I did not need to advertise as much because there's lots of people around. You have people walking around in all the places I've been and set up showrooms. But I wanted to make sure at every place that I wasn't stepping on toes again. But you've got a lot of people around you. You've got an urban location, and you don't have to advertise as much in a place like that because the people are going to see you. You can do all sorts of different things to make it, attractive. If you are going to be in the kind of rural location, you're kind of out of the way destination. You're going to need to get some, advertising stuff around, billboard signs, or even just newspaper ads, I suppose, would do it. But that involves a lot of money on sort of ads. I've always done it through word of mouth by doing some craft fairs and get people to know where I am. So it takes a little bit longer to do it that way, but I was able to keep my expenses down. Because one ad in a newspaper could cost you $1,000, so you're really kind of, feeling like it's a risk, and how many people will actually look at the ad and then come out to you. So good signage is a really good way to get yourself going, at least. You should have open houses too, studio sales, events at your actual location where people will have fun. you can actually landscape your property. I learnt my lesson from a place in New York where a couple of guys had a jewelry studio, and they set up a garden flower business in the same location, and literally made the place like heaven. It was just so pretty. And so they really were successful because people just went, wow, let's stop here, you know. And that's, it's a win-win because gardening is fun, and it makes your life, full of color and nice smells. So I think that for me, it's always been part of it. Ever since I moved to Nova Scotia, gardening has been part of my routine. Another thing you can do is to actually do workshops and pottery classes, and I have done both. I don't do them anymore, but I actually ran 3 evening classes a week. Had 8 in each class, so about 24 students at one time every week. But that was very demanding on time, because even though they tried to keep the place clean, if you've got 8 people in a little tiny space and everybody's basically throwing mud on a wheel or on a table, you're going to get dust and dirt, and it's just really hard to control. So it's not a bed of roses just to try and make it through workshops and pottery classes. But I think one of the things that was really worth it for us is moving to this strange new area. We did pottery classes the year after we moved here. I set my studio up, I got it going by September, and by the following January I was teaching pottery classes. And they filled up immediately. So there was a big need. And I think in general there's a lot of people looking to do pottery classes. So I think if you want to go that route for a while, it gets you recognized in the area and gets, the name is put out there, and people, will do the classes. Maybe they'll buy some work as well. But it is a good way of getting to be known in your community. So basically what all this up to this point has come down to is the same old thing that you hear all the time, is location, location, location. You've really got to do your research and try and figure out, if you're going to set a place up, is the community going to support you? So do you have enough disposable income in that community that can actually, keep you going? It's just, you have to earn a reasonable wage, and that means selling your work. Probably, your expenses may mean you get 50% profit each year. So that's a lot of pots to sell to end up, let's say you want to earn $30,000 a year. You got to sell 60 to get that. So it's, out of your own retail location, that's a lot to ask. And when we moved to High Falls, New York, I set my goal at 50,000 retail sales in my studio gallery, and then I would give up doing craft fairs and I would focus on the gallery. Well, 17 years in, I had still not reached 50,000 in sales out of my retail gallery. So basically I never got to the point where I could give up craft fairs while we were living in New York. And we actually made a decision after 17 years that we had to figure out a different place to move to see whether we could make it work, because we were 10 years from so-called retirement, and I wanted to get this retail showroom that I thought would actually keep us going during retirement off the ground. And so at age 55 I decided with my wife, who was a Canadian, we should move to Canada. So before I discuss the place we finally ended up in Canada, I want to mention websites and digital marketing, because I don't spend a lot of time doing what website. I have one, but I don't pay attention to it that much. It's more of a record keeping website. I don't have any shopping cart on there. I've always felt like that's a little bit too pressuring for me. I have a gallery now, so I don't really encourage people to buy off the website. But for some people, if you don't have a gallery, you're going to have to pay attention to a website and all the other digital marketing things, which there are some people out there who can tell you way more than I can about that. I do do sell quite a bit off the web, especially the YouTube videos I've been doing. I sell to a lot of people from that. And my customers who come through the gallery will order and look at my website, or even the videos I post on YouTube, and just send me screenshots, and I sell work that way. It's pretty simple, pretty basic, but it seems to work. But if you're going to be spending time marketing on the web, that's a lot of computer time. Just organizing the social media, doing the posts, taking the photographs, formatting them to the right size, and paying attention to whether you get sales off the different Etsy, whatever else you're selling through. Then you've got to create your shipping labels and blah blah blah. You need to do a lot of stuff. So not even including the packing and the packing supply costs, the shipping charges, selling one piece at a time rather than doing wholesale, which we've already talked about, where you can actually sell 50, 100 pieces to a gallery, put it in a huge box or several boxes and ship it off. That, you've got a lot of pieces out the door straight away. When you're selling one piece at a time, with packing, it's a lot of time. And you also have to consider what happens if something breaks, and have some sort of returns policy. I always tell people that basically the post office and UPS don't insure anything anymore. So basically I'm your guarantee. If something gets broken in the mail, I'm going to have to send them another piece. So there's twice the mailing cost. You could just refund them the money. I guess it depends on the cost of the item. So refunding may be better than sending another piece. And you got to consider payment methods and the time it takes to get paid. With wholesale, a lot of net 30 stuff means you don't get paid for a month. I actually do wholesale to about 5 places here in Nova Scotia, and they pay for it up front. So I actually don't knock my price down by 50% either. So I've kind of managed to get some reliable clients who have shops and stuff that they don't expect 50% off. I generally take 20% off or 25%, and they write me a check or do a credit card right on the spot. And I do e-transfers in Canada where we don't lose money for the commission. So you've got to decide if you can do that with a shop or gallery, and if you end up with a situation where you have a shop or gallery who wants 50% off, and then they want you to pay for the shipping, and then if you get damaged items in the shipping and then you lose the money from that, you have to consider it's not really worth doing wholesale at that point. So unless your prices are so high for your items that you can still make it work. So I think that a lot to consider there. Now the teaching of the workshops I mentioned a few minutes ago, and teaching evening classes, we did that for about 8 years, I guess it was, from when we moved here in 2011 until the pandemic. So that was about 2020 when we taught the last. So we did about 9 years of teaching classes and such like that. Well, when I actually set up my pottery in Nova Scotia and I started teaching workshops and evening classes, I had the fire inspector turn up from the local municipality and do an inspection and tell me I had to do a whole bunch of stuff to my studio to make it comply, and if I didn't do it, they would close me down. So we had to put a disability bathroom in, and I had to do ramps to both levels of my studio. So all of a sudden I was going to make something around about $12,000 a year from evening classes, but to do that I had to spend about $25,000 to put ramps around my studio and put a disability bathroom in my studio. So it ended up being 2 years of income from the pottery classes to pay for all the stuff to actually do the classes. And I actually decided to do it because I was thinking long term, and the ramps and everything have a life expectancy of about 10-15 years if you use pressure treated wood. So I was thinking, like, okay, so this makes sense, but it means I won't be making any money from the classes or the workshops for a couple of years. But you have to watch out for that. If you are going to do it in your own house or something like that, you're letting the public in your house. You might get hit by local bylaws and the local laws for accessibility, and you'll have to fork out a lot of money for it. Now, there's also what you consider, the fees for your pottery classes. How much are you going to charge? And I just looked at other things comparable in the area, not counting subsidized ones that the local town was actually putting on themselves, because that was subsidized by taxpayers' money. But the people who were making a living from it, I just looked at what they were charging and just charged the same. You've got to also, if you're going to be doing a pottery course, there's firing fees, material costs, and you have to consider the time it takes you to clean the studio too. I had to clean the studio before the class and after a class, and then the following day after a class I had a lot of prep work and finishing work to do to make sure their work would be ready for the next class. So it took up a fair amount of time in addition to teaching the class. You also have to buy equipment. If you're going to be teaching classes, you need more than one potter's wheel. I had 8 students. I had to have 8 wheels. And so I figured that 8 was the max I could do comfortably in my studio, although sometimes I would get people from another class couldn't make their class, wanted to come into the other class, so we would have 10 in there sometimes, and that was tight. And it became a kind of a headache trying to accommodate everybody's kind of time frame when they because it was getting a little bit too kind of stressful, I thought, at that point. So when the pandemic hit, I actually kind of was relieved, and I stopped teaching classes and moved online with the YouTube channel. I sold the equipment to my students, sold 8 wheels and a slab roller, and helped them find kilns so they could actually have a kiln in their own house. So we kind of had an easy kind of end to the pottery classes. The pandemic kind of forced it on us. But studio etiquette is important. If you're going to have multiple people in your space, you have to have some rules about cleanliness and leaving tables clean. If somebody picks up a chair, back of a folding chair, and they've got clay all over their hands, you've got a great big handprint on the back of the chair. You've got to make sure that they clean that up. And it's very easy for people to not doing it on purpose. They just forget. And so you end up with a lot of stuff to clean up the following day that takes up a lot of your time and all that. So considering time and money, and that following day after the class, it became a lot for me. And when I actually stopped teaching the classes, my income went up because I was spending way more time making pottery than teaching. So it was just the balance had just sort of gone beyond what was acceptable for me as a teaching person. What about distractions during the day if you're going to be a self-employed potter and all that? If you've got a regular job, you're working 8 to 4, and they pay you a salary at the end of the week, that's it. Your evenings are yours, your weekends are yours, and so on. But when you're self-employed, your life tends to get sort of merged into your employed job that you've self-imposed upon yourself. So it is pretty much just, it's all merged into one. And, I would say, self-employed means always employed and you're always working. But if you enjoy what you're doing, you never work a day of your life. That's what I've been told. So, when you have a studio and, you've got other things happening around you, life sort of merges into your work, you get time when you're just not working, you're doing other jobs. And so that kind of makes it difficult to actually keep track of your time during the day. Phone can ring. Somebody comes to the door, you have questions. If you have a gallery, people want directions to somewhere else. They maybe just want to use your bathroom. So there's lots of distractions when you have a gallery. So having a gallery, in my opinion, has been the best of all the things I've tried. But you've got to remember that you're in this, if you're going to try making money from this, it all comes down to whatever that dollar is at the end of the day, after all the expenses come off. What is left for you, and is it worth it? Considering you love what you're doing. If you're making pottery, you wouldn't be doing it if you didn't love it. But you've got to think, is it actually worth it? Am I actually making enough money so that I can pay the bills, enjoy my life, and go out for a beer with your buddies, whatever you want to do in your free time. It's just got to come down to that, and that's something where you just have to think of the expenses, think of the amount of hours you're putting in. Maybe you're really good at record keeping and you can make it like a time clock thing where you actually measure exactly how much time you got into something, and then when you sell it you can actually figure out the actual profit that you've made from something, and you can see. But the way I do it is I'm not obsessed about that because I love what I'm doing. I look at it at the end of the year, how much money I've still got in the bank, and if it's enough to get through the winter when you're not really doing much business and start up again in the spring, that's all I'm asking. I like to, I love what I'm doing. I recommend it to everybody else. As long as you're a hard worker, this isn't something you can just kind of do in a sort of flaky way. It's a real commitment. If you're an artist, it's a lifestyle. You're really, in my opinion, living the dream. But maybe it's not for everybody. I mean, if you can find a beautiful place to set a pottery up and actually do what you love to do, what could be better?